the channel, we are doing a 7.5k subscriber cash monies giveaway. It should be very, 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 very nice to do that. I'm very excited, obviously. But yeah, I think that's it. So I think we can finally get started. Okay. So let's just get started here with a random NBA legend. And one I have here that just popped into my mind is one that could be definitely overhyped sometimes. Some people calling him one of the greats, a top 5 player of all time even, or a player some people just completely forget, and that is Tim Duncan. Yes, is Tim Duncan underrated or overrated? Take a nice little trip into your mind. Think about how you view Tim Duncan, how the analysts view Tim Duncan, how the world, randoms, the casuals view Tim Duncan. Do you think he's a little bit underrated, or do you think he's a little bit too much respected? Now, for me personally, if you are done thinking about that, there is also another option of being rightfully rated, and I would say personally that Tim Duncan is probably rightfully rated. I think Tim Duncan right now is in a good spot. Obviously, with how a lot of NBA players now, the sort of older generation, the 2000s, the late 90s, the 2010 era of guys are starting to come to an end of their NBA journey, really starting to figure out who were, the real runs, the real ones of that era, and who weren't. And obviously you have players like LeBron James, Kobe Bryant. You could argue, Chris Paul under that conversation. Some really big time NBA greats played in that era. But Tim Duncan, I feel like, is one of the realest to come out of that era. Obviously being, quite honestly, like I said before, the greatest power forward of all time. His record, his accolades, the way he carries himself, everything is just top notch, top tier. But a lot of people, I don't want to say shun or shine down upon Tim Duncan because of his play style and the system he was in, the players around him, the coaching he was a part of. Obviously, with arguably, again, the greatest coach in basketball history, Greg Popovich, people don't really give Duncan that much praise. So, again, was he just the right player at the right time, or was his own talent getting to where he needed to be? I think he's definitely rightfully rated, maybe even a little bit underrated, but I can see arguments for both sides. Next up on this listing is going to be another big man, which obviously big men were very well renowned and praised back in the day, so we're going to take a look at probably a lot of big men who maybe aren't the greatest, but here's one that's very interesting. Is Bill Walton. Yes, Bill Walton. Was Bill Walton overrated or underrated? Now that's a very interesting one. Again, if you ever just want to pause and think about it yourself, but in my opinion, obviously being a Blazer fan, I think Bill Walton was overrated. I think definitely, obviously, very much due to the fact of injuries. This man could not stay healthy, but when he was healthy, he led Portland to an NBA championship in their first 7 years. Portland was established in 1970, won a championship 7 years later, mostly because of Bill Walton, and obviously Bill Walton in college, high school, absolute dominant player. And I'm not saying as a basketball player was he overrated or underrated. He was a great player. But we all know that Bill Walton was inducted into the 50 greatest basketball players of all time. He was inducted into that same class with Hakeem Olajuwon, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, the 50 greats. If you don't know that list, I've done a video on it before, but he's a part of that. And I don't think his NBA resume reflects that very well. He did win another title in Boston, but he was mostly a bench player. He was a good player even after his injuries, but obviously nothing to where people praised him like they used to. I think, quite honestly, Bill Walton is overrated. conversation, especially when we're talking about 90s big men. Maybe a forgotten 90s big man at that. Dikembe Mutombo. Was Dikembe Mutombo overrated or underrated as a player? That's a good one. Now, again, you can pause if you want to think. As an NBA legend, if you want to call him that, do you feel like the defensive prowess that Mutombo brought to a plethora of teams, obviously being his most famous moment when he, was laying on the ground with the basketball, upsetting, I think, that the number one seed at that time as the 8 seed of Denver Nuggets, is that very important? Is his help with the championship run with Philadelphia, with Allen Iverson arguably being the maybe second, third best player on that championship run with Allen Iverson, is that important? Or do you just find Dikembe Mutombo just being a good defensive center? He was tall, he was lengthy, of course he's going to be a good defensive center. Does he have good defensive IQ? Absolutely, but this dude would probably put up 6 or 7 points in a game. Sure, he would have maybe 3, 4 blocks a game, maybe 10, 11 rebounds, that's cool. But does that affect how good he was all time? That's the question. And that's a tough one. I think Dikembe Mutombo is maybe rightfully rated. I think a lot of people do know, obviously, Dikembe Mutombo being the finger wagging defensive monster that he was. I think a lot of people understand that, but I don't think people would call him like an NBA, GOAT, legend, one of the best centers during that time period. I don't think anyone would say that. Maybe you would, but I haven't really thought or heard about that ever. And now, again, if you're talking about NBA defenders, if you're talking about, the best shot blockers in NBA history, sure, you could say Dikembe Mutombo in that conversation, but if you're talking about any other conversation, talking about centers of the 90s, centers all time, even just big men in general, I think Dikembe Mutombo is very far down that list. Good player, but not a great player, if that makes any sense. Here comes another good one, maybe a little bit more of a recent one. I think this player retired sometime in the early 2010s, late 2000s era of basketball. Do you think that players of old and maybe players around him think that Grant Hill is Grant Hill an overrated or underrated NBA player? Ooh, man. Again, injuries. Kind of like going into the Bill Walton conversation again. If you listen, watch a lot of, NBA TV, ESPN interviews with Grant Hill, people talk about Grant Hill. He was going to become the next face of the NBA. He was going to take the mantle from Michael Jordan in carrying the league. Players have said this before, don't get me wrong. Do I think that Grant Hill, fully healthy, could have taken that? Wow, that's intense. And I say he even might be, even in today's NBA, how players view him now, I think he might be underrated. I think a lot of people have forgotten how good Grant Hill was coming into the NBA and arguably carrying, no offense to Detroit, but you want to talk about Detroit being a bad team now. I mean, Detroit back in the day after, the Isaiah Thomas bad boy era was over, that team was also is history in the NBA. Wow. Clyde Drexler. Now the only reason why I talk about Clyde Drexler in this conversation is because, if you didn't know, during the 90s, he was considered and even called, quoted, mentioned as the Michael Jordan of the West. Obviously, if you've seen the Jordan documentary, you would know Michael Jordan took big time offense to that and showed it during the NBA Finals where he whooped Clyde Drexler. And obviously, Clyde Drexler held his own, was still averaged like 25 points throughout that series. Still a very good player, but I mean, comparing Clyde Drexler to Michael Jordan, is that overhyping Clyde Drexler? Who knows? But at least in my opinion, the entire career of Clyde Drexler, is he underrated or overrated? Or rightly so? Oh man, I am going to say that Clyde Drexler was underrated. I'm saying Clyde Drexler, even being compared to the Michael Jordan of the West, I feel if Clyde Drexler would have at least gotten a little bit more help, kind of like with Michael Jordan obviously having Scottie Pippen, and we all know I could talk about Scottie Pippen in this video being underrated or overrated. Definitely being a very underrated player throughout that era. Definitely could have been the number one option for a plethora of NBA teams during that time period. If Clyde would have gotten a combo guy like that, obviously having, a good team around him with, Terry Porter and those whole, that whole 90s squad, that was good. Imagine if, Clyde had his own 1-2 punch of two All-Stars. Now that would be very interesting to see. There's also a very interesting one. Maybe I'll do a couple of quick fire ones for you to sort of finish off this video with. Paul Pierce. Is Paul Pierce underrated or overrated? I will say very quickly, hopefully a quick explanation. I think Paul Pierce he might be a little bit overrated. I know. Paul Pierce during that era was, arguably, up there with the top scorers of the NBA during that time period, obviously with, Carmelo, Kobe Bryant, this and that. Paul Pierce could definitely hold his own. But obviously being on a big 3 title contending championship team for years, say if that team was never assembled, say if even Ray Allen wasn't there, if Kevin Garnett wasn't there, do you think Paul Pierce and even one of those other superstars in their prime, give you that, could have carried the Celtics to a title? I honestly don't think so. Now imagine if you teamed up Kobe Bryant with Kevin Garnett in their primes, or LeBron James with Kevin Garnett during that era where they were battling against each other. How good of a team that would have been. That seems pretty good. So maybe, obviously that team was built very well and obviously won a title. No offense to Doc Rivers, but definitely should have won more titles and won more, but did the job, got a title. But I think Paul Pierce may be a little bit overrated due to the fact that he was on such a good team. Alright, so I'm going to probably just wrap up the video here, but I am going to do a couple of quick fire ones if I can remember some of them, or I have some right here on my phone as well. But we can do some quick fire ones as well. You sort of spew out an answer while you're trying to sit there and relax. Player number 1, we have David Robinson. David Robinson of the San Antonio Spurs. We talked about him a little bit earlier. Is he an underrated or overrated player? Obviously winning multiple championships, an MVP even, and even scoring 72 points in an NBA game. Underrated or overrated? I would say personally underrated. I think he's another forgotten great. I will call him a great NBA center, David Robinson. Let's see. Chris Webber. Is Chris Webber an underrated or overrated NBA player? Obviously taking that, well, not taking, but help taking that really talented Sacramento Kings team with him and Vlade Divac and Peyton Jason Williams, white chocolate. Was he a little bit underrated during his time period for helping that team win a conference, well, trying to win a conference finals against arguably one of the best teams ever assembled, with Kobe and Shaq? Or is he a little bit overhyped? Was the team built around him a little bit too good? That's a very interesting one. Was he more of a one-dimensional player? Was he pretty bad on defense? I would say yes. I think he's very rightfully rated, I'll say. I don't think anyone calls him, one of the best power forwards of all time. I think he was definitely one of the best ones of that generation of the late 90s, but I don't think I've ever heard anything too crazy about him. I think I've heard people more slander on Chris Webber, obviously being, that funny, timeout scandal he had in college, but I think as an NBA player, he had a good career, maybe a little bit overrated, because again, we all think about, Sacramento Kings, Chris Webber, but we all forget about the other times he struggled throughout his NBA career. Moses Malone is Moses Malone, Moses Malone, underrated or overrated? I think this one's more of an easier underrated one. I think if we even talk about the NBA greats of centers, I feel like Moses Malone should at least be mentioned. Not mentioned at number 1 or 2 or 3, but definitely should be in that conversation, obviously being maybe one of the first ever double-double machines. When I mean double-double, this dude would put up 20 points and 20 rebounds in a game, you know what I mean? He was just a dominant player for that generation. Another good one, Jerry West. Is Jerry West underrated or overrated? Obviously being the logo, going to the finals multiple years, I think 11 times or 9 times in his career, but coming up short a lot of those years. Was he more of an individual stat player, a stat pattern you could say, or was winning an option? I don't know. I would have to say maybe a little bit overrated. I think a little bit. I think if Jerry West was not the logo of the NBA, I will say this, if he was not the logo of the NBA, he would be another really good forgotten player, sort of like a George Gerving or a Bob Cousy type of player, who are really good players in NBA history, but maybe not as mentioned because he's the logo. Another good one. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, Gary Payton. Is Gary Payton an underrated or overrated player? Sure, we all know him as being one of the best, if not the best, perimeter defender in the NBA's history. But is that too much hype? Is that a little bit overrated? I mean, Michael Jordan would have his answer of that. I don't think he had very much trouble of having Gary Payton guard him, but man, that's a tough conversation. Is he underrated or overrated? I think he is rightfully rated, maybe even a little bit underrated. I think offensively, Gary Payton doesn't get enough shine for being such a quick, fast, and even athletic guard who could get to the rim, can dunk on people, very crafty with his ball handling skills well, was a very strong player, especially later on in his career. I think Gary Payton might be even a little bit underrated when we're talking about, the best point guards of all time. I think people forget about, Gary Payton, because everyone thinks Gary Payton's just, a Patrick Beverley of the 90s. He's not. This dude could drop, 5 steals in the game, could pick up 7 rebounds and guard the enemy team's best player, while also dropping like 20 to 25 points in a game. People forget about that. I think he might be a little bit underrated. I think those are good. I think that's well in the video. If you can think about so many other ones you can think of, that'd be cool. I would love to hear some more. I would give my own opinion, I guess, if you want to hear it, or we can have a little chit chat in the comments. I think that'd be kind of cool. But yeah, guys, that's gonna be it for me. I really hope you have a really good rest of your day or night, or whenever you're watching this video. I am planning on doing another live stream. I live streamed yesterday before the NBA Finals. If you missed that, I'm sorry, but I'm planning on doing a gaming ASMR live stream maybe on Friday night or Saturday night. I'm not entirely sure, maybe even Sunday, whatever day sort of fits my schedule and your schedule as well, on a night where maybe you can try to fall asleep to the gameplay or something like that. Maybe just doing like an ASMR live stream